Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Holden, and I'm going to kick off this conversation, the old and the new, by asking Finn about your story, because we thought we'd start by
It's
doing
amazing, really, what you're doing.
tell us about your story.
About what's coming.
Thanks, Patrick, and great to be with you here today. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a high country sheep and beef station at the bottom of the world in Lord of the Rings country in the South Island of New Zealand. So my family farm, it's on the Southern Alps. We've got 10,000 merino sheep and a couple of hundred Angus cows. We're deep into regenerative agriculture, climate action on farm, and also improving biodiversity and water quality in the Southern Lakes area where we are. I'm also co-chair of Future Farmers New Zealand. We're a bipartisan organisation in New Zealand advocating for systemic change in the food and fibre sector, and also running my own small company, Climate Action Company, working with farmers around New Zealand to develop carbon credit projects and biodiversity credit projects. So over to you, Patrick. As I understand it, you've been a pioneer of the organics movement around the world, and it'd be great to hear a bit more about your dairy operation at home in Wales.
Okay, well, I too have got one hat. I'll start with my farming story. We are 51 years in on our farm in West Wales, where we milk 90 cows. We turn nearly the milk into a single farm raw milk cheese. We are also growing carrots.
All at once, right?
We grew carrots for 25 years for supermarkets.
But I mean, sorry, like these different streams
again,
like organising
in West Wales, which is rather exciting. I've been at it so long.
This is the space where you can connect with.
We're now the longest established
made, right?
dairy farming.
No, so I mean, like, there are so many donors,
organizations, the organic standards. When I was working at Soil Association, but I stopped.
You're going to middleman some big donors.
Convinced that unless we have global transition to all farmers throughout the world, we wouldn't be able to address climate change and the other existential threats in the time available. So I've got a day job with the Sustainable Food Trust. Summary.
Do you have any questions? And Patrick, I'd be interested to know how you feel the organics movement, the relationship between the organics movement and climate action on the farm. Do you feel like organic certifications are also being a conduit for action in terms of the environment and climate change on farms in the UK?
Yes, it's such an important question, because there's a global debate at the moment about the relationship between regen and organic. And I guess I'm quite well placed to comment on that, because I was so entrenched with the development of organic standards and the market over so many years. My view is that it would be very unfortunate to have a polarization between the regen and the organic movements at this time, because I can say this with some authority. When we developed the organic standards, and I actually drafted, I think, the world's first draft of the organic dairy standards, because I was on the Soil Association Organic Standards Committee at the time, and they said, well, you're a dairy farmer, why don't you write what you're doing down, literally? So I would say that what we were trying to do when we went organic back in the 70s was farming to address sustainability issues. We didn't understand climate change at that time, but we were definitely wanting to farm in harmony with nature. We really cared about the social outcomes, and we were also trying to improve the fertility of our soil. So now regen movement is actually aspiring to do exactly the same thing. There is no commonly accepted definition. Maybe that will come, but I think the best way to reconcile any tensions that do exist is to measure sustainability in an internationally harmonized way, so that I can say to you, Finn, what's your sustainability score? You're a regen farmer. I'm a regen farmer too, although I call myself an organic farmer. And if I had a reliable way of measuring my carbon, nature and social impacts and could give you a score, then you could do the same and we would have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. That's been one of our big challenges on farmers. Our primary product is fine wool. We supply to high-end fashion companies around the world to create luxury garments like my clothes here. They're all wool. So I think it's really important that we're also, actively trying to consume food and fibre products as well, and know the source of our products. But in trying to communicate with those luxury fashion brands, they've been really interested in the organic certification. In New Zealand, there's no merino sheep farms that are organics yet. There's been a few challenges around the animal health products that we're allowed to use on farm, and also fence posts. We would have to replace every single fence post on our farm if we want to be organics, because of the tannins that we used in fence posts 60 years ago. So there have been some of our challenges in uptaking the organics movement, but those consumers are also interested in regenerative agriculture credentials and climate change and an LCA and B Corp. So we've got 5 certifications on farm now, which is costing us a lot of money, but it's important because it's important to demonstrate that what we're doing is actually delivering action on the ground. But certainly the conversation around regenerative agriculture in terms of a definition has become quite convoluted, and that's been a challenge for us in communicating what we're doing on a global stage, because we say we're regenerative, we believe in regenerative agriculture, and although we've got 5 or 6 different certifications, it's hard to sort of define what regenerative agriculture means in terms of outcomes for us on the farm.
Well, do you know what? I could say exactly the same thing. We've got 5 different audits, annual audits on our farm, excuse me, most of which we pay for. None of them tell me whether my soil carbon is up on last year, whether my biodiversity index has improved, or whether my social outcomes, which would include nutrient density, impact on public health, the education of people who come to our farm. The audits don't tell me any of that. They just tell me I'm not cheating, or other data which I'm not really interested in. So we thought, this is how the Global Farm Metric initiative, which the Sustainable Food Trust is leading, developed. There's a bunch of farmers and landowners who compared their certification stories. And we all agreed that the current audits weren't fit for purpose. So we thought, well, we're farmers, why don't we co-develop our own? So I think after this conversation, we need to talk, because I think we can harmonize what we're doing, and it would be brilliant for the whole world and for COP. And I'd like to come back to you in a sec and ask you why you're here, and I'll tell you my story as well. But before I do that, my brother is involved on the Isle of Skye with a project called Skye Weavers, where he is buying the wool clip from the flocks on the west side of Skye, turning them into beautiful garments, which I'm not wearing today, but I better do that tomorrow now. And I think textiles and fibers are really important, because I'm told that about 80% of all the clothing, including the suit that I'm wearing, come from oil. And we have to have a transition in clothing as well as food. So why are you here?
Totally agree. Well, that's a great question. I guess I'm here because I'm deeply passionate about climate action, and I'm also deeply passionate about farming. Globally, agriculture or food production is responsible for 25% of global emissions. Agriculture is a really unique sector. In New Zealand, sheep and beef farms alone occupy 40% of our land mass, and at the moment they're seen as a problem in the climate change story. But I believe the food and fiber sector is really unique, because not only does it have a potential to neutralize its impact, but it also has the potential to go beyond that and become a really positive impact on the planet, sequestering more carbon, improving biodiversity. And that's why I think, globally, agriculture can be an incredible conduit for positive change, and really believe in telling that story. And I love farming and want to talk about it. Yeah.
Brilliant answer. And here's mine. Here's my take on agriculture. I've been at quite a few COPs. I was trying to add them up. I think this is my 8th. I was at Paris, the COP29 in 2015, and a minister, the French minister, Stéphane Le Foll, at the COP29 gathering, he launched this initiative called 4 pour 1000, 4 per 1,000. And the idea was that he thought every farm in the world should measure their soil carbon and set a target of increasing the total organic stocks by 0.4% per year. What a visionary idea. And funnily enough, I saw him at a conference on soil in Arles just 2 weeks ago. He's still on the case, but he wasn't listened to. And I think the big problem about the COPs ever since the Paris Agreement is that agriculture hasn't really been on the agenda. So here's my take. This is why I'm here. During the last 75 years, I think we've used up around 50% of the coal, oil, and gas fossil fuels that were laid down over approximately 150 million years. So we've been using stored sunlight in the form of fossil fuels at about 1 million years a year. But we've also depleted our soil. And whereas we cannot replace the coal, the oil, and the gas, we've got to move to renewables, obviously. What we can do is produce food at the same time as rebuilding the soil carbon stocks. And I don't think that issue is really firmly on the agenda of the COP yet. And I'm so happy that you're here and you see things the same way, because I'm totally convinced, as you just said, that we can move agriculture from being part of the problem to being part of the solution, but only if we switch our practices in quite a profound way. And because I've been practicing agriculture, which I believe is part of the solution for half a century, I think I'm confident from what we've seen on our own farm. We haven't measured accurately, but we had a go at it. That we can be part of the solution. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. It's also been one of the challenges we've had on farmers in implementing a lot of these regenerative practices, like eliminating tillage. We've eliminated pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all chemicals and synthetic fertilizers on the farm. As we believe we're building up organic matter and soil carbon, and turning our soils from a net emitter to a net sequestration activity through agriculture. But the challenge has been in measuring that, and it was only last year that the technology came online, or the science came online in New Zealand to be able to accurately measure that and ultimately incorporate that in our carbon budget on our farm. Has it been the same experience as the UK? Are you able to, is the science there that you're able to accurately measure soil carbon yet and include that in your farm's carbon footprint?
Such a good question. I would say not yet, or not well enough. But when we started up on the Global Farm Metric, which was about 8 years ago, we asked ourselves the question, what would success look like? And our answer to ourselves would be that if the government, our government in this case, but all governments, decided that they would make the receipt of post-Brexit, in our case, but future EU subsidies dependent on measurement and collecting data on soil carbon, climate impact, but also nature and social impacts, that would look like success. So if I do a kind of audit, how are we after those 8 years?
Yeah.
The Northern Ireland government, I bet you didn't know this, they last year made receipt of public subsidies conditional on measuring carbon and biodiversity from the air, a thing called LIDAR, upon receiving the future post-Brexit subsidies. And guess what? 92% of the farms in Northern Ireland have signed up, and they are measuring the soil carbon using a thing called agri-carbon, which is like a quad bike which goes around and geolocated cores.
Right.
They drill into the ground at every field. So 92% of all the farms in Northern Ireland have got a field-by-field measurement. We think
that's amazing,
isn't it?
That must be one of the biggest soil carbon assessments in the world, potentially.
I think it is.
We're up there. Yeah.
I think it is. And I saw our Chancellor, who's called Rachel Reeves, I saw her last week. I was at a dinner and I went up to her and made a nuisance of myself. And I said, you know what, you should look at Northern Ireland because they're leading the world. And I'm from Wales, so I want Wales to do better than Northern Ireland. I'm also come from the UK, so I care about what England does too. And I think Ed Miliband is here. He's the climate net zero minister. I'm hoping that he's going to listen to this because, after all, Rachel Reeves holds the purse strings. And it seems to me that it's not right to use public money. I know you don't have a subsidy scheme in New Zealand, but basically, if farmers are going to get public money for public goods, then we should measure. So I think the science on measurement needs to improve, but we're getting there. What about you?
Yeah, that's one of the big differences, I think, between agriculture in New Zealand, which is our farmers are proudly subsidy-free, and the UK. But I guess the unique thing about subsidies is the UK, as you're right, they can be used as a conduit for sustainable change because they can be conditional on environmental outcomes. So you feel like that is starting to happen in the UK, or maybe more so now with the change of government, potentially?
Hope so, is all I can say. I think it's irresponsible of a government to give farmers subsidies, and I receive about £100 an acre or £250 a hectare for just being a farmer at the moment. And the post-Brexit scheme is becoming increasingly conditional on delivering so-called nature and climate outcomes, but they're not measuring.
Right.
So that's irresponsible, it seems to me. And I want to be measured. I want the measurement scheme to be harmonised, and I would love it if New Zealand and the UK, we were measuring in a common way. And I believe that we, the farmers and land managers, are in the best position to help governments who always follow, they never lead, towards global harmonisation. So after this conversation, we should definitely talk.
Yeah, and that's been another one of the big challenges in New Zealand. Because we don't have subsidies, the main lever the government has is actually the stick instead of the carrot, which is why there's been a lot of opposition from farmers in New Zealand to change, because it's been, emissions pricing. New Zealand was supposed to be the first country in the world to introduce agricultural emissions pricing. That didn't happen because of the change in government, but it looks like that's still going to happen regardless in New Zealand, just a couple of years delayed. There's a lot of opposition to that because the only levers that the government has is the stick in New Zealand. And so one of the things that we've been trying to work out is, what policies can be introduced in New Zealand that are actually, my philosophical belief is government policy, ideally in agriculture, should be 50-50 carrot and stick. And how do we get the carrot there for farmers in New Zealand as well? Yeah.
Totally right. If you think about it, the Northern Ireland scheme I just referred to is a stick disguised as a carrot. In other words, you don't get the money unless you measure. So it's both.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, that's innovative thinking.
It is.
And we should all go there. Well, you can't go there because you're an unsubsidized nation, but you can do the measurement and then you can sell clean, green New Zealand products to us. And I think, talking about trade barriers, which are all in the news at the moment because of the Trump election, it seems to me that rather than have a war on trade barriers, we should agree that we should measure the climate, nature, and social impacts of all farming systems throughout the world. And then we could have future trading arrangements based on whether the farming systems are truly sustainable or not. And then there could be tariffs, which are important to prevent unfair trade, based on whether your carbon footprint, your nature footprint, and your social footprint is a good score. And how wonderful would that be? And why not? What really strikes me about being here at the COP is that it is an incredible gathering of trust, actually. You walk around here, there's every country in the world virtually here, and we're all in it together. We know that. There's an atmosphere here of mutual trust and collaboration. And I believe extraordinary things can happen, and they must happen, because otherwise we're going to pass on the planet, because I'm part of the binge generation, to people like you in an unfit state.
Yeah, that's what's happening at the moment, unfortunately. And yeah, we need conversations like this to catalyze some real change at scale. I guess that's what we've tried to do on our family farm. We're a really big property, 16,000 acres, and we're, I think, unique because the land holdings in New Zealand are much bigger, and we've been really trying to prove that regenerative agriculture, or our interpretation of regenerative agriculture, is actually working at scale, because I think that's been one of the challenges, one of the criticisms of regenerative agriculture is it works well on these small land holdings, but can we actually scale it up into global food systems? Our experience has very much been yes. We've lowered our cost inputs, our tractor hours are down, our synthetic fertilizer use is eliminated, so we've cut costs significantly there. A lot of our other inputs are right down, and our production has stayed the same, if not increased. And so some of the new, I guess, science coming around these diverse pastures and holistic grazing, I think, is really important to communicate it to farmers to get uptake on the ground around the world. Do you think that's been communicated well to farmers in the UK as well? Like, yes, there's the subsidy approach, but also actually changing some of these practices is going to help you produce more and lower your costs and affect the bottom line.
No, I don't think it has, which is sad. I think there's a kind of bunker mentality amongst farmers, and the tax that's just been announced, a death duty on land, has made farmers very angry, and they're all marching. But I think what I think is really important about this conversation is that farmers ought to be enthusiastic about what we're discussing, because we can be paid for being soil stewards, nature stewards, and social stewards, stewards of public health. This is a massive economic opportunity, and we shouldn't go into a sort of defensive posture, because it's not farmers' fault that they've been part of the problem. The subsidies in the economic environment, which has not made farmers or land owners financially accountable for damage to climate, damage to nature, and damage to public health. So farmers throughout the world have been following the best business case, that they've got big or they've got out, and they've intensified. And because the economic signals have pushed them in that way, they're now feeling very defensive, which is understandable. But actually, this is a massive opportunity. And just talking about whether this can be achieved, because you mentioned that, we have not kept good records on our farm. I'm so cross at myself for not having realized the opportunity to do that over 50 years, but we haven't. We've been measuring our soil carbon reasonably well for the last 12 years or so. And now we're beginning to measure our biodiversity, and we're looking at also nutrient density. Our carrots are being measured because we're certain they're more nutrient dense than conventional carrots. But if we could collect that data and show that our farming system is carbon negative, which I think it is, that means that our total sequestration of soil carbon is more than our total use of everything, energy, fossil fuels, etc. this would be a game changer. And just talking about the scale that that could be operating on, I know of a large farm in Wiltshire in England, the south of England, which is sequestering 10 times more carbon than it's emitting. And this is a mixed beef, suckler and arable farm with a proper crop rotation, which is building fertility. Now, if you scaled that globally, agriculture could become a massive part of the solution, maybe even sequestering 25% of net global emissions and putting it back in the soil.
Yeah.
Because as I said at the beginning, coal, oil and gas, we can't put that back. But what we can put back is soil carbon.
Exactly, yeah. So our farm's net position, we're emitting around 2,500 tonnes every year, but we're actually sequestering around 4,500 tonnes. So we're net positive on a large scale, which in New Zealand we think can be scaled up significantly. And that's not counting our soil carbon sequestration yet. So that's a really exciting opportunity. But you talk about before effectively internalizing externalities in the food system, which I think you and I would both agree that one of the problems is that we haven't accounted for all these negative externalities in the agricultural system, and ideally would like to internalize those through, effectively taxes, making farmers pay for their externalities. The main criticism of that, I think, is potential to inflate food prices. What do you say to that between balancing the need for food security and also internalizing a lot of those externalities?
Yeah, we did a report which we published in 2017 and upgraded a bit in 2019 called The Hidden Costs of UK Food. And the headline conclusion of it was that if you buy food in a supermarket, most of us get our food in supermarkets, if you spend £1 on food today, that's not the real cost. The real cost, if you factor in the negative externalities, the damage to climate, nature and public health, it's probably at least £2. That's the real cost of the food. And then there's been a subsequent report done by Rockefeller that estimates that it's actually £3. So our food pricing system is dishonest. And the reason why politicians are reluctant to make farmers accountable for their negative externalities, to use economist language, is because they fear, as you rightly say, that it's going to put the price of food up. But if the food pricing system is dishonest, we're just fooling ourselves. And it seems to me, and this is back to my relationship with our Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, what I want to show to her is that if she invests in sustainable agriculture, she will save on NHS treatment costs. Because in many countries, whether they have a nationalised service or a private service, in declining public health is a massive cost. Yeah. And if we could demonstrate that eating more nutrient-dense and safer food without pesticide residues, because cancers and food intolerances are going through the roof at the moment, we could save on NHS treatment costs. That should be an economic argument for governments throughout the world to act, because this is not a unique situation to the UK. All over the world, previously uncommon health issues are getting much worse, including cancers. And I'm absolutely convinced in my own mind that part of that's due to primary agriculture.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we need to, in a New Zealand context and globally, not only remove agricultural subsidies in a number of settings, but also introduce externality pricing. But at the same time, because that is a significant change in our global economic systems for food and fibre, at the same time, we need to be able to enable farmers to have access to the carrot as well, which for me is potentially carbon credits on a global scale. And that's a big topic at this COP is Article 6. And I really believe that Article 6 needs to be an enabler for positive action on farms around the world, allowing all sorts of landowners to demonstrate that they're sequestering carbon and to be able to access Article 6 transactions as an enabler for positive change on farms.
Totally agree. Interestingly, the carbon credit market, it's got a little bit of bad press over the last couple of years. It's a bit like the Wild West, people are selling carbon credits which haven't really been substantiated. But just because that's true at the moment, there's a risk of greenwash. It doesn't mean to say that if we had a properly regulated carbon market, it couldn't be a massive part of the solution. And there's a man here, Helmi Abeleish from Egypt, and he's got a stand in the blue zone, who I believe the Egyptian government is one of the only countries in the world that's actually regulated their carbon market. So he is involved with a scheme whereby organic and biodynamic farmers in Egypt who are sequestering carbon through composting, through good farming practice and through trees are actually getting paid carbon credits, which is meaning that they don't have to charge so much for their products. So if you think about it, I'm getting currently about £100 an acre from UK subsidies. Let's say I make £100 profit from the sale of my cheese. We produce cheese and we produce carrots at the moment. If I had another £100 for the delivery of carbon, nature and social credits, and I keep on mentioning social credits because actually I think the damage to public health may be the biggest negative externality of all. If I could be paid for those with regulated markets, that would be a game changer for us all, because we would then be able to continue to make food affordable, but at the same time derive a new income stream for what we're delivering.
Yeah, I totally agree. So my small company, Climate Action Company, we've now got 17 carbon credit projects around New Zealand working with farmers to restore native forest on farms. But I think one of the challenges with the carbon markets at the moment is the barriers to entry are quite significant for smallholder farms. I mean, even large farms like ourselves, you know, when you talk about developing a carbon project, it needs to be thousands of hectares and requires significant upfront finance to get the paperwork done in the International Voluntary Carbon Market at the moment. So for me, a really important prerequisite, yes, integrity is important, but we also need to make sure it's pragmatic and that smallholder farmers around the world are able to access it without all these barriers in the way.
That's really important, because it seems to me that one of the unfortunate consequences of developing these markets is that they tend to favour very large farmers, and not to criticise your farm, it's a large farm in New Zealand terms, but we're just a small farm, really, 300 acres. I think it's really important that small family farms should be part of the solution, because I think that small family farms should be the cultural heart of agriculture. And we need financial climate which enables those farmers to stay in business.
Yeah, totally agree.
Now, I'm just wondering, maybe we should just, I'll ask you first, maybe you can ask me. So while we're at the COP, what would success look like when we leave?
Well, success would look like, to me, progressing the discussion on what does a robust international framework look like in terms of certification. Is it called regenerative, organic? You know, as a farm, we're B Corp, we have a regenerative certification in New Zealand, although it's a pretty widely adopted one. I think we could be more progressive in terms of the certification we use. What is it called, and what is sort of the global, how can we get global adoption for that new certification as well? Not just because we need more robust reporting of data, but also as a cost-saving exercise, because we're spread between 5 different certifications at the moment on farm, with customers and different governments and different export markets all demanding different certifications. How can we try to streamline that process?
I think that's a brilliant target, because I would say very similarly, in relation to the current debate about regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture, of which I've been very involved, let's not have friction about that. Let's find a way in which we can reconcile these two sister movements by measurement. So if we had a common measurement framework, it doesn't matter whether we call ourselves organic or regenerative or any other term, agroecological, there are other terms are available. If we were all measuring globally using the same framework and the same architecture and the same metrics for measuring climate impacts, nature impacts, social impacts, this is a process. We're not going to get there in a day, but it needs collaboration. This would be brilliant for future COPs, and actually be brilliant for the world, because I'm absolutely convinced in my own mind that unless we change agriculture, which is the majority land user on planet Earth, we are not going to address and realize our climate change ambitions.
I totally agree. Yeah, agriculture's got to be the biggest part of the solution.
So how about this? We're nearly coming up to half an hour. Does anybody want to raise a question that we haven't yet addressed?
Why do you think Ireland has been able to be successful in rolling out an effective carbon measurement subsidy scheme, and we haven't seen that in the rest of the world or even the rest of the UK? Is it as simple as they had the right government champion at the right level, or is there something that can be replicable in that learning?
That's such a good question. I'm not sure if everybody heard it. Did everybody hear that? I'll just repeat it. You said, why did Ireland get there and a lot of other countries didn't? It's actually Northern Ireland, not the Republic of Ireland, although, you know, I think there's a lot of interest in this in the Republic now as well. I think it is actually kind of accidental. To your point, one man, a man called John Gilliland, who's a regenerative farmer in Northern Ireland, he took it upon himself to knock at the door of the Department of Agriculture with this proposition that farmers should measure, and that the Northern Irish Department of Agriculture should make that a condition of receipt of subsidies. And he won the argument. And he's now an influence in other parts of the UK as well, and I believe in the south of Ireland. So more power to his elbow, I say. And I think it's also very difficult because there are all these competing schemes, you know, carbon credit schemes, and we mustn't compete on this. We've just got to find a way of harmonizing our efforts. And I think the Northern Ireland, bless them, the Northern Ireland Department deserve credit, and we should just learn from them. There's no shame in not being first. Maybe they'll have first mover advantage, and that's another very interesting thing. There are a lot of businesses here at the COP, which I think is brilliant. A lot of them want first mover advantage, which is natural, because if you're in the business community, you want to be first in something. But actually, we must remember that why we're here is to collaborate. And if we get a common architecture for measuring sustainability impacts, this will be very good for the business community.
Well said. I have a question regarding these studies. Is the government only supporting the farmers because of financial support, and the condition are the measurements? Is there any other tools to get to the point where their measurements will be acceptable for the subsidies?
Got an answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not subsidising in New Zealand, so I can't speak to the New Zealand context. But a lot of the big food producing bodies in New Zealand have been pushing certifications on farmers or new forms of environmental reporting. And you're right, one of the challenges being this hasn't been a lot of support for farmers to get through these new frameworks and new requirements for environmental reporting. And we've got to make sure that we're providing the right support, be it accounting support, administrative reporting. The reporting obligation, certainly in New Zealand for farmers, has got pretty burdensome and cumbersome. You're reporting your different environmental metrics to council, to the federal government, to your food producer, to your customers as well. And so streamlining, I think, software for reporting for farmers that's really accessible is a big part of that. And I'm sure that's probably the same in the UK as well, as making those, your subsidy reporting framework, it's got to be easy and accessible for farmers.
Yeah, so if I was to imagine the future that I want to step into, I would like to have one annual sustainability audit on my farm. I'd like the Welsh government to pay for maybe a third of it, maybe more. And this would then be like a passport to access to receiving a new income stream for my carbon sequestration net, for my biodiversity net gain, and for my social positive impacts, if they are. And I think the business community, asset managers, anybody who's made a Scope 3 emissions, got under a Scope 3 emissions demand, would then be able to part finance me. There'd be a business case for that. So one of the things we're doing in the UK within a project called the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which was launched by the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles, in 2020 at Davos. He was under the impression that unless we involve CEOs of the business communities throughout the world, we'll never make the change in the time available. And I'm heading up one of the task forces on measurement, but I'm also involved with the Agribusiness Task Force. And we convened a meeting which actually took place at the Royal Farm at Sandringham last year on financing the agricultural transition. This was based on the proposition which we've discussed earlier, that unless we get a new income stream for our sustainable farming, we won't be able to compete with extractive farming. And so you've got to divvy up. You've got to have an organized framework for measurement, that's one. And then you've got to work out who's going to pay, because this should be what's called blended finance. It's like a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, but then there are boundaries. So if I get paid by the Welsh government for my carbon, then somebody else wants to buy my carbon credits. How's that work out? Or I don't know if any of you have heard of a thing called insetting, which is now a new piece of language in the whole COP debate. And this is about, say, if you're Nestle and you wanted to inset your carbon, this would mean you'd buy a product and the product would include a positive carbon sequestration. But then what about if I want to sell my carbon? So I could be selling some of my carbon to an airline, and then the Welsh government might be paying for a bit of my carbon, and then there's an inset.
So on my farm at home, we work with Allbirds to inset our wool, which was going to them, and they launched the world's first carbon zero shoe with our inset wool. But we also sell carbon into the voluntary market, and then we also sell carbon into the government market. So there's and we're we've got a good framework, so we don't double count on all that. But that's been it's an opportunity. We're lucky that I guess we've got the knowledge and IP to be able to access all three of those different markets. But for a lot of farmers, they don't have those tools. And look, there are opportunities coming to farmers around the world through the carbon markets. It's how can we make that accessible to people who don't have the knowledge or the skills in the carbon market. That there's not many farmers who have someone who's got a PhD in climate science running their sustainability operations. So we've got to make it accessible.
So you, me, both, but all farmers need to be assured that there are people thinking about these boundaries in insetting and offsetting between private sector and public sector. And we need to have a framework, which again is common to all farmers, so people who buy food and people who vote can trust that we're getting our act together. Now, I don't know, it'd be interesting to know from anybody who's watching this discussion, whether this sort of discussion we've just had is happening in the COP negotiations. And if it isn't, why isn't it? Any other questions? Two.
There you go.
It's been covering it's happening. You mentioned the role of government and the role of the farm, really customers. What is the involvement of the supermarkets in the environment?
So I have a very passionate debate with my dad over this, who believes that consumers will be the ones demanding change, paying premiums for sustainable products. And our experience as a farm has been that, yes, consumers will drive action because we're supplying to a number of these boutique luxury fashion companies who have consumers willing to pay a premium for sustainability credentials. My opposing view is slightly more skeptical in that the majority of the world's consumers are purely driven by price. And the same when it comes to clothing. And so, we need consumers to drive the change. Absolutely, yes. And we need people to choose natural fibers when they're next shopping. And we need people to, consumers to choose sustainably produced food. But we also need the farmers to, to want to drive this change themselves based on the carrot and the stick. And then we also need the government to be an enabler of that. So I think it's got to come from all directions. It won't just be consumers.
Yes, I think I agree with everything you just said. I think the organic project is a very good case study because we didn't have measured externalities to justify our claim. We were just saying, hey, it's a better way to farm land, because it was a bit like that. It came out of the sort of green movement originally, I did. We just took it on trust that consumers would believe that organic was better without being able to demonstrate it through measurement. And I think if we are going to pay more, we need a trusted and verifiable claim, which could be on products. So to your point, I can't see why, for instance, I'm a producer of cheese. It's cheese with a good story. But if I could say my cheese has a high sustainability score, say it was a score out of 100, this is an imaginary scenario at the moment, and I could say, well, my cheese is nice, but it's also carbon nature and socially friendly, and here's the score. And then you are producing your products on your farm, and they could similarly have a score on them which was using the same core measurement. I mean, obviously there's differences. We were just talking before this about biodiversity in New Zealand, which of course is not the same, but we can make those adjustments on a national basis. So I think to give consumers confidence in the marketplace that they can play a part in enabling the tradition, we do need market support as well as government support and the support of the business community. That's another goal for us both. I think we share that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the moment, it's difficult for consumers to actually make decisions. Not only is sustainable fashion or natural fibers in fashion completely inaccessible to most people, but it's also not very well communicated. I guess that there's. We need effort on both sides, empowering consumers to have more knowledge around sustainable consumption, but also, for businesses, they need to drive the change themselves and make those products more acceptable themselves.
And in a way, the organic project is a case study in how we're doing our best. We said, look, it's better, but there was a glass ceiling, and you could say, well, if you're really generous, what's the scale of the organic market sales globally? And I was very involved with this internationally over many years. 5%, and that's over generous, because people are resistant to high prices and they don't understand all these arguments about negative externalities and all that stuff. So really, we need to. All the conversation we've had, I think, is pointing towards linking sustainability measurement to some sort of marketing product label which people can trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.